Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Garb August 3D, the Garb August 2024 event created by Ollie at Criminolly, where he gets us all to read trash for the month of August, to put aside or throw aside our standards and read trash. And I am adding a piece of trash to my reading every night in the month of August, and maybe a little bit of trash during the day. But the trash that I'm writing during the day is usually stuff that doesn't think it's trash. It's new releases. I read new releases. I principally read new releases. And quite a few new releases are trash. They are garbage. They are really, really bad. But in the kind of garbage that we don't really talk about on Garb August. Not the fun kind, but the time-wasting kind. The time where the author either has nothing interesting to say or has lies to tell and is writing garbage that way. In that sense, those books fall under the very broad umbrella of garbage being worthless books. But of course, you can be worthless in a number of different ways, and there are even some seedy worths that can be drawn from the best kind of garbage, which is the kind of garbage that we like to be celebrating here on Garb August. The trash that I read during the day is almost always not going to be that kind. I don't know of many writers who are writing that kind of stuff today. So instead, it's going to be, I don't know, plandemic, Biden crime family, climate hysteria. They announce themselves fairly early on. You don't have to get past the subtitle, usually, to know. I read them anyway, but you usually don't have to get past the subtitle to know that you're going to be reading a garbage book, but not a fun kind of garbage book. But I'm reading the fun kind, or trying to, every night. And last night I reread a book that was, I would not have read it. I would not have read it for Garb August, but I was watching Joseph Reads Books. I'll leave a link to his channel down below about his own Garb August reading. It's a terrific channel. I think he's from Texas. So we've got another Texan in our midst, in addition to Randy Ray. It's a terrific channel. I strongly recommend that you go and subscribe. But he is all on board with BookTube events. Some of them he likes a lot of BookTube events, as do I. I think it's tremendous fun. He's all on board for Garb August. So he made a video about Garb August and the stuff that he is going to be reading. And quite a few of the things you'll see in the video, quite a few of the things that he holds up are absolutely within the ballpark of the kind of garbage that we're talking about. I was saying the other day, I was referring to my quadratic equation of garbage, where there is innocent trash and guilty trash, and there are innocent trash authors and guilty trash authors. And a number of you were making little jokes to the effect that I was perhaps making things up as I went along. I will make a full video about that quadratic equation. How I wish I had a whiteboard. This channel really needs a whiteboard. I will draw it all out for you so that you know that when it comes to this, as when it comes to all the other things, Steve is always right and knows exactly what he's talking about. But several of the things that Joseph Reads Books held up are clearly trash. They are clearly fair game for Garb August. But he also brought up a number of things that gave me pause. And so I thought, instead of really reviewing or discussing the piece of garbage that I read last night because of Joseph Reads Books, although I will discuss it, I would also do a little trash talking. This is stuff that I love to do. This is how you can. I'm guaranteed to ruin parties, because this is what I do. I take an innocent subject and I theorize about it. I do all sorts of Jesuitical hair splitting about it. Now, the book that his video suggested to me was this one, The Death and Life of Superman by Roger Stern. I have an ebook of this, and it was really, really sort of touching. Joseph Reads Books held up a very battered hardcover of this that he read when he was, I think he said 13 years old, something like that, or 16 years old. He said it was a long, long time ago, which I thought was kind of funny because he's a kid. This book did not exist when I was 15 years old. Roger Stern had not yet been born when I was 15 years old. Joseph Reads Books did not exist, nor did his parents, nor did his grandparents. His grandparents existed, but they hadn't met each other when I was that age. So to me, for him to say that, it was a little bit odd. But at least DC Comics existed when I was 15 years old, just barely. But I read this, of course, when it first came out. This is Roger Stern's novelization of the storyline of the death of Superman, which I talked about recently on this channel. It made national headlines. Dan Rather talked about it, where DC Comics, on a Michelob-inspired whim, decided to kill Superman by having a giant monster called Doomsday, a giant mindless monster called Doomsday, come to Earth, deciding to kill everything, kill in a straight line until it gets to Superman, and then they punch each other dead. And in my analysis of that stupid issue, which I bought it with a black armband, I have said forever and ever that that's not possible. A number of people over the years, and in response to my latest discussion of this, a number of people just recently have pointed out to me that several times in boxing history, two boxers have come raging out of their respective corners and decked each other unconscious simultaneously. That does happen. Okay, it's still dumb. In a comic book, it's still dumb. I don't think you could kill each other simultaneously anyway, but maybe there's an example in boxing lore of that happening too. But Superman appears to be dead. He appears to have killed the monster that kills him. So he is given a funeral for a friend, and then in his wake, a whole bunch of Superman claimants come forward. There's a man in armor. There's a half-man, half-robot, weird cybernetic creature. There's a guy in shades. And there's a boy in a leather jacket. They all come forward claiming to be Superman. And that gives rise to one of the greatest... the death of Superman as a graphic novel for DC. It's one of the best-selling graphic novels of all time. Still, regularly, one of the best-selling graphic novels of all time, even though it's awful. And the sequel to it, well, the immediate sequel is Funeral for a Friend. That sells well. But also there's a big book called The Reign of the Supermen, and that sells like crazy too. Because that's the whole story of all four of those beings, where you as a reader are wondering, DC obviously is going to continue having the character Superman. So is one of these characters the new version of Superman? Is that what this was all about? And Roger Stern had a hand in writing some of those issues, and he knew the other men who wrote them, and he got the brief to write the book. So this doesn't have any pictures. I read this when it first came out and thought exactly about it what Joseph Reads Books says about it, that it's competent. Overwritten, poorly written, but competent. I reread it last night for the first time in eons. I reread it last night. And yeah, all of its flaws come raging to the surface. Yeah, absolutely. Because, and this is not a problem unique to Roger Stern, plenty of other writers of comic books have come across this. When you're writing a comic book, you're adding narrative boxes and dialogue thought balloons to artwork. That's pretty much all you're doing. You can say that you're a writer, but you're writing comic books where 90% of the narrative job is not yours. And so you are untested on whether or not you can do 90% of the narrative job. You're untested in that regard. And most people, when they're tested in that way, fail. And Roger Stern is one of those people. This book is, at best, a prose summary of those comic book issues. It is certainly not a substitute for them in any way. On every page of this book, almost every page of this book, you will be saying, okay, what? Wait, what? Suppose I don't know anything about the comic books. I certainly know about Superman. Sure, Superman, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, Perry White, Daily Planet, Lex Luthor. Sure, I know about Superman. Everybody knows about Superman. Previously uncontacted Aboriginal peoples know about Superman. Everybody knows about Superman. But I don't read the comics, much less the fine print of the comics. So when you talk about how Lady Maxima is from the planet Almerac, or the various personalities of the Newsboy Legion, not only do I not know what you're talking about, but I don't know why I should care. And Roger Stern absolutely does not do any of the why you should care, which is the whole point of being a novelist, is to make you care about the proceedings. Not in the 21st century, but for all the rest of time, the people were writing novels. The whole point was to make you care about the proceedings so that you would be involved in the story. Nothing like that happens here. This book is obviously, it's an obvious point, but still, this book is written for people who knew the comics. and will, I would think, be precious little there for the people who don't. But as a work of prose, just describing a high adventure story, Roger Stern doesn't ever let the ball completely drop. He does remember at every point to tell you at least a brief context of what is happening, instead of just telling you what's happening. This is all declarative sentences. This is all action. But he is telling you what is going on. We get a prose flashback to Superman's origin story, as it is in the 1990s. It's not Superman's origin story, because Superman's origin story was set 20 years before then, in Action Comics number 500. Superman is not sent to Earth from a dying, desolate, icy, emotionless, eyebrowless planet Krypton in a birthing matrix so that he can be born out of that matrix in Kansas. That was dumb John Byrne. That was the guy who was given Superman to desecrate. John Byrne wanted if Superman is the all-American hero, that means he's got to be an American, and that means he's got to be born here. So I'm going to send a birthing matrix that rather than a live baby in a rocket, so that when he gets to Kansas, he is then born here. Because if he's going to be an all-American hero, he has to be born here, as if the all-American point about America isn't immigration. Anyway, in this 90s version of Superman, both Ma and Pa Kent are still alive. In this 90s version of Superman, Superman's powers are not evident right away. They take time to develop. In fact, they develop around the time that he's a teenager, much as though he were one of John Byrne's precious mutants. In this version of Superman, he is a living solar battery and gets his powers that way. There's a scene early on in the book presaging the rest of the novel. So Roger Stern is aware of some of his duties as a writer. This is a novel, after all, in which Superman is going to be beaten to death. Doesn't matter if he's going to beat his assailant to death. He himself is going to be beaten to death. That, of course, is blasphemy. Superman is invulnerable. You can't beat him to death. You can't even hurt him. Nevertheless, in this storyline, with this John Byrne Superman, he is a living solar battery. He exudes a kind of personal force field that makes clothing next to his skin invulnerable. So he isn't invulnerable on his own. He emits this kind of energy field that makes him invulnerable. And early on in the book, there's a scene where the friendly exposition-dumping scientist is pointing out to him that after a very busy day he recently had, his energy levels did noticeably drop. And it took him a while. It took him the better part of that week to get back up to feeling up to snuff. You have to have that scene to prepare readers who might not know the minutiae of the comic books for the fact that the Superman in this book can, in fact, be beaten to death. He can't be. Superman is invulnerable. And also, he's stronger than anyone. Doomsday included. But anyway, in this stupid Marvelized version of Superman, all of those things are true. And Roger Stern does give us extensive exposition dumps on those things that don't feel completely unnatural. I wouldn't probably remove them. There's no real way for you to do it other than this, especially when you start to get into heavy exposition territory, like needing to explain who the Justice League is. Because when this monster comes to Earth and starts killing things and people, the Justice League is alerted. And they go to address the problem, to find this monster and take it into custody, to render it harmless. If you know nothing about comics, or if your comics knowledge is decades out of date, you might think, well, that's the end of that story. Monster or no monster, if it's up against the Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern and the Flash and Wonder Woman, and if it's up against maybe even more, like Hawkman or Zatanna, then that's the end of that. It's just a brainless monster. The League will have it done in about 5 seconds. And in that sense, you'd be wrong. If you know this only from, for instance, the cartoon, the animated movie that you might have seen, then you might think that. Of course, that League doesn't fare any better because that cartoon was dumb. But this isn't that League. This isn't anything like that. This is a League composed of third-string losers. And Doomsday, the monster, walks right through them. Now, even though they're third-string losers, the monster shouldn't walk right through them. One of the third-string losers is Guy Gardner, who isn't a Green Lantern at this point in the story, but he has an exact equivalent energy ring A ring that has unlimited energy resources to do anything that he can will it to do. So an experienced Green Lantern who has that kind of a ring against a mindless monster, no matter how strong it is, that fight is over in 2 seconds. There's also a mysterious character with the Justice League whose name is Bloodwind, with a Y, W-Y-N-D. And we don't know a lot about his powers, but we know he's mighty strong. He's next to useless against Doomsday. Next to useless. Most of the rest of the League is useless anyway. I couldn't wait for this particular version of the Justice League to die. In fact, when I was watching the run-up issues to the big confrontation with Superman, the run-up issues were happening in other comic books, and I was really hoping that instead of just defeating this Justice League, Doomsday would kill them all. I was really hoping that that would be true. It wouldn't be quite the sales getter as killing Superman, but the comic book world would be a lot better off if someone killed Fire, killed Ice, killed Blue Beetle, killed Booster Gold. Just kill them all. Get rid of them. But the monster doesn't do that. Beats them to a crap, but doesn't kill them. And is totally unhurt by anything they do. And so the novel has to go to the same route as the comics did, whereas Superman ends up being the only person on Earth who can fight this thing. And what are you going to do with a fight scene like that? To his credit, Roger Stern doesn't try to describe it much. He just brings things quickly to their end, where it seems like Superman is dead. And then we get long descriptions of all of these claimants. And I don't want to spoil the death and life of Superman if you were to get, for instance, the enormous omnibus. I'm sure that Michael K. Vaughan has the enormous omnibus of everything all together in these issues. I don't want to spoil the ending. I'll just say that none of those 4 claimants is actually Superman. And there are moments at the end of the comics run that are pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. There's nothing great anywhere in this story. And there should be. The whole thing should have been great. And because there's nothing great in the comics, there's only so much that Roger Stern can do. He could have done more if he were more talented as a novelist, but he, as it is only just what Joseph Reed's book says that he remembers as being competent. Yeah, this is competent. And that raised a question in my mind about trash. One of 3 questions about trash that his video made me think about whether or not you would consider this to be trash. I mean, it's not great literature, obviously, but don't we mean something else when we mean trash other than just a book not measuring up? That's why I opened this trash talk video by talking about the kinds of trash that I read during the day as a critic. I read a bunch of stuff that definitely doesn't qualify as our fun definition of trash. It is trash. It is horrible. It is a waste of time, but it's got usually more sinister motives, or it's just inept, or even only average. The Death and Life of Superman by Roger Stern is just average. It's an average book, which means for most people it's a waste of time, which is bad. That's really bad. You only have a limited amount of reading time, after all. So do we call it trash? I mean, I don't know why Superman has almost never been written about well in prose. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because he's just so thoroughly a creature of comic books, the very first creature of comic books. Maybe that's it. Maybe he just so thoroughly inhabits that genre that people can't do a good job of it, can't actually imagine him in prose. But this is an example of that. He's just not done well here. You don't know who he is. You don't have any idea what other people think of him beyond what they say in their thought balloons in the comics. You don't have any idea what it's like to be in the same room with him or on the same battlefield with him. Nothing like that at all. So the Death and Life of Superman is not a good book. It's not a bad book. You'll keep reading, especially if you know the issues, especially if you don't need the context of the exposition dumps, because Stern can't provide it, or this would be 5,000 pages long. He can't provide the context, and he doesn't have the skill, the narrative skill, to render the context non-essential. If he did have that skill, he could do it. He could make you feel things instead of just telling them to you. But he doesn't have enough skill to do that, and so he's left with only needing to describe things. So is that trash? I don't know. And then at another point in his video, Joseph Reads Books brings up something else. He brings up John MacDonald. He brings up the Travis McGee novels. and says that he guesses that they're trash, but they might be enjoyable. And I swear, when I heard him say that, I recoiled just a bit. I recoiled just a bit. Wait, I wanted to say, wait. The Travis McGee novels aren't trash. But I felt that same kind of spasm when he talked about the death and life of Superman. Are the Travis McGee novels trash? Are they? I don't actually know. Surely, critically speaking, on one level, they are. Oh, goodness. Baby, what are you doing? You're going to make it across the Bering Strait there? You're going to go over to the chair? Maybe I can get an action shot. Oh, look at that. You get it all on this channel. But is it just sentiment that made me recoil when he said that? When he said that I guess this is trash? I wanted to say, no, it's not. But then I started remembering the books. What's actually going on in the books, how the books themselves are written. They can be eloquent at times. John MacDonald can be eloquent at times. And sometimes insightful. Like every once in a while. Not every Travis McGee novel, not even a whole novel, but every once in a while in a novel, I don't know. Or is that me? Or is that me just trying to pull some sort of exception for books that I love so much? Have I loved them my whole life as trash? I don't know. Joseph Reads Books has made me reconsider my whole reading life. What do you think? What do you think? I'm pretty sure that all of you would agree that this is some form of garbage. Obviously, right? I said the other day that movie adaptations are by necessity garbage because the writer doesn't control the material. They can't do anything with it. Well, this isn't a movie adaptation, but it is the same thing. Roger Stern can't have this turn out any different. He can't, for instance, have Doomsday come to Earth and face an actual Justice League, the real Justice League, and get his ass handed to him. He also can't change this story because the Legion of Superheroes, 1,000 years in the future, who took their inspiration from Superboy, who is Superman when he is a boy, come back in time to face and easily defeat Doomsday because they don't want Superman to die. So they're going to interfere in history. He does all kinds of novels like that. He doesn't tell. He can't. He can only tell this story. So obviously we would agree that on some level anyway, that is garbage. But what about Travis McGee? When Joseph Reads Books mentions him, do you also recoil? Do you also just for some reason not want him to be called garbage? I'm not saying that he isn't garbage. I'm saying this is fascinating to me. This whole thing is fascinating to me. I have to admit, I mentioned it earlier in this interminable video. I like to do this. I like to interrogate booktube concepts, booktube events, that sort of thing. I love to interrogate them. In addition to wholeheartedly participating in them, I love to question them and think about them. I'd probably ruin it for everybody. I'm probably that guy at every dinner party. But it's made me think. I mean, what would we say here? Is there some sort of sliding scale arithmetic that we could use to somehow make the Travis McGee novels not trash? I mean, when you measure them against Anna Karenina, sure. But when you measure anything against Anna Karenina, I don't know. Joseph Reads Books has me thinking, which Steve does not like to do on a hot weekend. And then there's the third thing that he mentioned. He doesn't show it, but he mentions it. And it's this. Sword of Shanara. By Terry Brooks, which he basically just calls what it is, a Tolkien ripoff, a thoroughgoing Tolkien ripoff. And I believe in his video he mentions that he has no objections to it, that he read it and enjoyed it. I read it and enjoyed it. But is it trash? Certainly later on in my booktube viewing, I watched Liam's Lyceum. He does Liam's Leapings, where he talks about his weekly reading. And in the course of, they're always fascinating. They're always fascinating. And in the course of his latest one today, he mentions that he DNF'd Sword of Shannara. He is reading other Shannara books by Terry Brooks. He's not objecting to this author, but he couldn't finish Sword of Shannara. So I got a couple of mentions of this thing, and I'm wondering. Now I'm wondering, well, what about this? Is it trash? And if it is, why? Is it trash because it rehashes Tolkien? There are plenty of people in the bookish world, there may even be a couple of them on BookTube, who think that Tolkien is trash. So what do we do then? What do we do then? Clearly we need my whiteboard quadratic equation now more than ever. I will get to work on it. Not the whiteboard, because I don't have a whiteboard. I wish I did. Ooh, can you imagine? I had an editor once. We used to joke all the time about the standard joke was that it was a standard joke, but it was funny because it was partially true. The standard joke was that I was really knowledgeable about books, but a little bit of a loon, and that I was trying her patience at all times. That I always wanted to do the unrespectable thing, but that she had to rein me in. And it was a running joke of ours that I would say, well, Christmas is coming up, and she'd say, oh yes, are you going to have a wonderful time? And I'd say, yes, but I'm wondering if I'm going to get a present from my editor. And she would say, well, I let you rummage around the books 3 times a week. Isn't that gift enough? Well, for instance, what would you like? And I would say, a whiteboard. And she'd say, no, the last thing you need is a whiteboard. Because she knew that if she got me a little whiteboard, I would be bringing it over to her desk every time I came up with some crackpot theory. But we clearly need that. Because what are we supposed to do with this video from Joseph Reads Books? A troublemaker. The long-haired kids are always troublemakers. Is Sword of Shanara trash just because Liam couldn't finish it? Is Travis McGee trash? Travis McGee having sexy adventures with interchangeable brainless women on board the Busted Flush. Is this trash? And if it is trash, is it the kind of trash that we're reading for Garb August? I don't know. And what about the Death and Life of Superman? Is this trash? I don't think I would ever have reread it if not for watching his video, but now I'm all in a tizzy. So I did read something for Garb August last night, The Death and Life of Superman. I reread it for the first time in 40 years. But I think I want to retreat tonight into trash about which there are no questions. So I think I will hunt through my shelves or my iPad and find a piece of unambiguous trash. But in the meantime, am I the only one being thrown into tizzies? Or is this just Joseph Reads Books making trouble? Or do you sometimes wonder, does Garb August sometimes make you think, do I mostly read trash? I didn't think I did. I'm curious to know. Of course, this conversation goes real deep with romance readers, because not only might they have these doubts, but they are told by all other book readers that they read trash all the time. That is not true. I always say that is not true. I say it's relative. There are scales. There are subgenres, and you pick how well you are doing in your subgenre. It's ridiculous. If you say that that's not true, if you say, I am a big fan of objective quality, but if you say there's only one objective quality and no other, that none of it changes according to context, then that would mean that the fact that The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shire is not as good a sonnet as the sonnet by William Shakespeare, that it's bad. When it's not, it's really good at something else. Same thing is true with genre fiction, especially romance. You think it's really easy to write an emotionally satisfying category romance when your characters are prescribed, when your action is prescribed, when the length of the book is prescribed. You look at those prescriptions and you think, oh, well, so of course this is garbage. There's no way to do it well. Try do it yourself then, if you think that's true. Try writing something saleable yourself. Harlequin has an open submission policy on their website. If you think you can write something like that at 150 pages, go right ahead, that they'll take, or that readers will like. Because readers are pretty vocal about what they like and don't like when it comes to romance novels. Now, it's just a different set of standards. It's just viewed by the rest of the reading world as garbage. And some of it is garbage. But what about... I think it might be this that's bothering me the most. Just because if I got the impression from his video that Joseph Reads Books has never read Travis McGee, and that if he reads it for Garb August, he's going to be reading it as trash. Should he? Should he be reading it as trash? And if so, what about James Bond? I don't know. I don't know. I'm throwing it all in your lap just because this is the sort of thing I do with events. I theorize them up. I Jesuit them up. So I'm going to wrap this up for now before I go on for another hour, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.